In the Middle East. Joining us tonight is Israel's ambassador to the U.S., Ron Dermer. Mr. Ambassador, thanks for being here. First, your reaction, world reaction is condemning this strike today on this UN school.
Well, first of all, before we rush to judgment, we can't be sure exactly who's responsible for this. You remember a couple days ago, we had an attack on a hospital in Gaza and on a refugee camp where a number of children were killed, and everyone rushed out and blamed Israel for that. Turned out, and I actually bought a photo of it, this is an image of a satellite photo,
we have a full screen of it too.
Of a radar photo, where we find out that it was actually 4 rockets that were fired by Palestinian Islamic Jihad. One went into the sea, one hit the hospital, another one hit the refugee camp, and the final one went to Ashkelon and was intercepted by the Iron Dome missile defense system. So in that case, Hamas was responsible. So I would not rush to judgment. We'll see what happened. We have a process in Israel to investigate every incident. We do not target civilians. We're doing our best to avoid civilian casualties, but we're dealing right with an enemy that places missile batteries next to hospitals, schools, and mosques, and are firing at our soldiers in a war zone from within these civilian areas. So we're doing everything to keep civilians out of harm's way. It's very difficult. We'll continue to do that.
I want to read the UNRWA Commissioner General's statement. Our initial assessment is that it was Israeli artillery that hit our school, which 3,300 people had sought refuge. We believe there were at least 3 impacts. It's too early to give confirmed official death toll, but we know there were multiple civilian deaths and injuries, including women and children, and the UNRWA guard who was trying to protect the site. These are people who were instructed to leave their homes by the Israeli army. The precise location of this elementary school, girls' school, and the fact that it was housing thousands of internally displaced people was communicated to the Israeli army 17 times to ensure its protection, the last being 10 till 9 last night, just before the fatal shelling. I condemn in the strongest possible terms this serious violation of international law by Israeli forces.
I would hope that you would add a couple of sentences there for the use of UNRWA schools, the UN schools in Gaza, as storage sites for missiles. That's what we had. We had UNRWA facilities, and UNRWA is a relief workers association. It's not supposed to be a rocket warehouse. We've had now 3 different cases of UN schools where we found rockets, and we had the UNRWA officials actually giving them back to Hamas, which is totally unacceptable. I don't know what happened around the school. I don't know the facts. I know that there was firing around it. I don't know if this is our artillery that's hitting them. I don't know if it's a rocket, but I think the UN officials should be first and foremost doing everything to make sure that there is not firing going around the schools and that there are not rockets in UN schools. That's unacceptable.
Mr. Ambassador, here's what Secretary Kerry said the other day about the efforts to get a humanitarian ceasefire.
Prime Minister Netanyahu himself said to me, can you try to get a humanitarian ceasefire for this period of time? And if it weren't for his commitment to it, obviously the President of the United States and I would not be trying to make this effort. Now, either I take his commitment at face value, or someone is playing a different game here, and I hope that's not the fact.
So, Mr. Ambassador, is Secretary Kerry telling the truth there? Did Prime Minister Netanyahu ask Kerry to go forward and try to get a humanitarian ceasefire?
Well, we have agreed to many ceasefires. I'm going to take you back 2 weeks. I know people lose sight of it because we're in a war. Yeah, the Egyptians proposed a ceasefire that was backed by the UN, backed by the entire international community, backed by the Arab League, and Israel agreed to it before there was a ground operation, and Hamas didn't agree. We have agreed to many humanitarian ceasefires.
This is about the one that fell apart, and he's saying that Prime Minister Netanyahu was the one who told him to get this humanitarian ceasefire.
Well, I know that we agree with the United States that we would like to have humanitarian ceasefires. We want to reach a sustainable ceasefire. Our goal is to make sure that we stop the rocket fire against Israel, that we take care of all these tunnels, and that after the ceasefire we deal with a problem that is a long-term problem. How do you prevent Hamas from rearming itself, from taking all the concrete and iron and using it basically to fuel the war machine that they've created in Gaza?
Has Secretary Kerry been helpful in that effort to get Hamas to disarm?
Hamas disarming is not in the hands of the Secretary. What we need to do is work together with the United States and with Egypt to put a mechanism in place to make sure that we don't have another round in another year and a half. This is the 3rd time after 2008 and 2012, now in 2014, the 3rd time we've had a confrontation with Hamas. If we don't want to see a confrontation in 2015 and 2016, we have to make sure that we have a mechanism in place that makes sure that the goods that are going into Gaza are for Palestinian civilians and not to fuel Hamas's war machine, its tunnels, and its rockets.
So when the U.S. brings Qatar and Turkey to the table, supporters, countries openly supporting Hamas, Is that a positive thing in your
Well,
view?
look, I don't think the U.S. was bringing them to the table. Qatar is definitely not a positive force in the region. They're funding a lot of bad actors, including Hamas. Turkey has not been a positive force in the region as well. We think the Egyptian ceasefire proposal is the only deal in town.
So how do you get back to Egypt? How do you get back to that proposal?
Actually, I think we're there. And the hope is that enough pressure will be put on Hamas by the international community, making them understand that the only proposal that's in play is the Egyptian proposal, and hopefully we won't have to continue this, that they will stop the rocket fire, we'll deal with the tunnels, and then we'll get this mechanism in place.
You said the truth is the Israeli Defense Forces should be given the Nobel Peace Prize.
That's correct.
You believe that?
Absolutely. I stand by that, and I'll tell you why. Imagine what would happen if you had over 200 million Americans in bomb shelters. Take what happened in Fallujah.
Right.
Put Fallujah next to New York.
Nobel Peace Prize?
That's right. Because how do you judge an army? You judge an army by how they respond under threat. We have our civilians in bomb shelters, and our army is taking greater care than any army in history to keep civilians out of harm's way.
Mr. Ambassador, if you'll stick around for the online show, we'd love to have you back.
Thank you.